Good afternoon. It is 2 p.m. on Monday, the 5th of July 2021. My name is Arran Hunt. I'm a partner here at Stace Hammond and I head up the Migration Partners team. As always, this is not legal advice. It is just our commentary and observations on immigration here in New Zealand. If you're looking for legal advice, please get in contact with us at the description down below. We'll try and get back to you as soon as we can, but there is quite a lot of inquiries coming through. We have 4 topics to discuss today. We're going to look at the new teacher border exception. We're going to look at those coming in on the investment visa exceptions. We're going to look at an update on the skilled migrant processing times and what to expect when you do get allocated. And we're going to finally look at the NZRP numbers. Now, the topic that most of you will be interested in is the weekend's announcement from the Honourable Chris Hipkins. We're going to link to the Stuff article below as well as to the Beehive press release. We don't have the official rules yet from Immigration New Zealand, so we are just working from the press release and from media articles. Typically, we would hope to have an amendment circular to be provided by Immigration New Zealand to tell us how the operational manual is going to change with this new exception. That has not come through yet, and we don't know when we're going to get that. Possibly it could still be weeks away, it could be hours away, we just don't know. We do know the basic rules, though we can sort of derive those from the press release and from the media articles and go through those now. For those of you who have been playing the how many times can Aaron say the word exception game, today I'll be saying it a lot because there's a lot of exceptions to this exception. This is a border exception similar to those in type we saw previously for medical staff and other critical staff. However, it isn't as broad as those exceptions. Where they were open to anyone who was eligible for under that rather large criteria, even with the high-level requirements of the other critical worker, this is limited to a total number of 300 people in total. So it's more similar to the other exceptions we've seen around, say, vets, sheep shearers, where a particular role has a set number of exceptions allowed for it, number that can be granted under that number. Now remember, that is 300 in total for a profession that has, that includes early childhood teacher, primary school teacher, secondary school teacher, university lecturer and postdoctoral fellow, all appearing on the skills shortages list. So this is a profession that is in dire shortages across the board, and they're letting in 300. Now, it gets more defined in sort of a complicated way. So the exceptions to the border exception here are a bit complicated. We're going to try and break them down and go through them to try and simplify it. There are 2 stages to this. We're going to cover that in a moment as to who can apply when, but we're going to look at actually who can apply in either stage from the criteria there. So to fit into either stage, you need to fit into one of the following categories. So for state or semi-integrated schools, that's school or kura, must be defined as being sort of hard to staff. It's in decile 1 to 3. It needs STEM teachers and demonstrates that they have exhausted their recruitment options in New Zealand. Now, if they are early learning services, for those looking at the early childhood education, they must be in an area which the Ministry of Health Deprivation Index has them at level 8 to 10, and must be able to show they have exhausted their options in New Zealand. Now, it is confusing having 2 separate scales used by this criteria. So you have decile 1 to 3, which is the school scale as the deprivation or the poverty of the students that go there. Is a simple way of putting it. It's a lot more complicated than that, but it's the simplest way of putting it. And then the deprivation index being 8 to 10. Now these are scales of 1 to 10 in both categories, but in the decile index, it's the lower ones which are the more deprived areas. In the deprivation index, it's the higher ones that are in the more deprived areas. So 1 to 3 is equivalent sort of 8 to 10 being the lowest to the third lowest numbers in the same category. So 1 to 3 in decile is roughly comparable to 8 to 10, although it is a different standard. So that's why we have the 2 different sets of numbers there, because I assume they don't give deciles to early childhood education centres. The other one is its definition of hard to staff, so that a school or kura is hard to staff, and it hasn't been defined yet as to what hard to staff means. We'll probably see that being applied once we see the actual process in place and how that's going to work. For STEM teachers, it allows for STEM coverage, and that, of course, STEM is science, technology, engineering and mathematics, which is an area there's often a shortage in teachers here in New Zealand. Now we're going to link to the Ministry of Education website, which provides us information so you can see what they're staying in there. So if you fit in one of those categories, you may be eligible. So if you're in one of those decile 1 to 3 or your early childhood 8 to 10 deprivation level area, teaching STEM or in a school that's hard to staff, then you may be eligible to apply. You will require a job offer from a New Zealand school, and at that point, this is when they sort of, again, split into two. So those applications are split into 2 stages. So in July, they will open to those teachers who had an employment agreement on the 19th of March 2020. So effectively, they were already in New Zealand teaching, or had they had been given a job here to teach, but they were caught off outside New Zealand when the border was closed. We don't know how many will still have active employment agreements in this situation, because it's been 16 months effectively since that took place. And it's also, when the border closed, we're sort of looking at 6 weeks into the school year, which started on the start of February. So we're not quite sure how many teachers would have gone offshore a month or so into the school year. So we're not quite sure how many are going to be caught there, probably not that many. But if that is you're in that category, you still have an open job offer there, your employment still exists, then there is an email address, border.exceptions@education.gov.nz. Look at the Ministry of Education website, we're linked into below. That's where the email address is, and you can write to them to ask for one of those exceptions in July to return to your job here in New Zealand. Now, for those who weren't here previously, September 2021 is when they will start receiving your applications, according to the website. The wording being, there is work to do in the process in refining the eligibility criteria. So still looking at how that's going to work, but September is when they say they're going to start receiving those applications, not necessarily processing them or letting you come to the country. So at the moment, the process is that if you are holding an agreement on 19th of March 2020 and it's still valid, email the ministry now. If not, and you have an offer of employment, wait a few months, and that's when the applications will sort of open for you if you fit in that criteria in either category. We assume once they have the criteria sorted out, they'll start arranging visas in conjunction with Immigration New Zealand. Now, the process itself hasn't been defined yet. We're still waiting to get that defined. It won't mean that those people are arriving in the country anytime soon. This is being set up with an eyes forward to sort of the start of 2022. We have seen in the past, when they have given this set criteria of this number of applicants, it being spread out over a long time. Remember, we had the 1,000 students. Those are still trickling in, and that's been a number of months. So this will be much the same, we expect, where they're going to have 300 now. You can apply. Well, you can't even apply now. You can email them interest now if you were in the country. If you wanted to come to the country and were here previously, you can sort of email them interest in a couple of months' time, and then perhaps you might be here in January, February or December, or sometime like that. We don't know the process yet, but it is going to be a slow one, we expect, spread over some time. Now, applicants can bring in their partners and children, which is fantastic. It's how it should have been for all these things from the beginning. The Beehive press release also mentions that a separate family unification border exception is being created for partners and children of those who are already in New Zealand on a temporary visa and who are teachers. Again, fantastic to have this. No details were given, but it's only been 16 months, so they're still taking their time to prepare this. But we'd expect that would be something in place along the lines that we saw with the partners of medical staff or other critical workers. Probably medical staff is probably the easier one to match it to. We'd expect that it's going to, if you look at how they did the medical staff one, it's going to require most likely someone who is on a essential skills work visa or some sort of work visa that ties them to that employment. So it says teacher or something of that, one of those areas on their visa. And that will let them come in, and it may have a minimum criteria of 12 months visa required still until they can bring the partner in. That's if they follow the medical exception, which they most probably will, just to save time. Now, it is great to see this, of course, but we think it really should have gone further. And while we understand they want to focus on those lower decile schools, those areas with the higher deprivation, we think that perhaps they should have gone maybe for a decile 1 to 7 rather than just 1 to 3. Now, there is no indication of how many teachers in the decile 1 to 3 were caught offshore. We think it's going to be a relatively small number, considering that this was a month into the school year and they would have been teaching. But so we don't think that this could have gone further. It could have added a bit more, allowed more teachers in, teachers that we need in this country. But it is a good first step, and I think it's leading us into that, hopefully, that border being opened at some point in the near future. As we often see with these Now, it's great to see this, but we think it probably could have gone a bit further. We understand why they want to focus on that decile 1 to 3, those lower decile schools, those high deprivation areas, but we think perhaps it could have gone maybe a little bit further, perhaps decile 1 to 7. We know that the high decile schools, they probably are without teachers, but they also often have a lot more teachers that can be spread around, or they have smaller class sizes, or they have the funds there to attract teachers to them, where those low decile ones often don't. They're often in more deprived areas, or they're in poorer areas, or they're out of the main cities and they're out in rural areas. So this is going to help them get staff in. But perhaps they could have gone, decile 1 to 7 maybe than 1 to 3, but it is a good start. I'm not going to I'm going to say, to the government, well done. It would have been nice to have this a while ago, but it's good to see it coming through. Let's get this pushed through as fast as we can, hopefully. Now, the next one we're going to look at is the investment visas, the border exceptions there. There was a report out in the media, I think this morning or yesterday, about the small number of investors entering New Zealand under the border exception. Now, this is something that we kind of mentioned in passing in an earlier video, and we did that deliberately. We didn't want to focus on this for actually one major big reason. On 30 April, this new border exception was sort of created by adding two new other critical worker exceptions into H530. One was for innovative partnerships, which is run by the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, and the other was for the NZ Trade and Enterprise Investment Attraction Program. Now, these would allow for investors to enter New Zealand for sort of fast-tracked residence on investing money in the country. Now, we didn't mention this for the same reason that the government didn't do a big media press release when they made this change, and they sort of just snuck it in there. It was only entered for a small selective group chosen by the government. Now, this was not an exception open to just anybody who had funds, and we have clients who have funds wanting to come to New Zealand to invest and create jobs, but are not included in this and don't have this as an option because they're not part of that, friendly government group, I suppose. These programs are ones where the government departments have selected you to apply, not the other way around. You don't apply for them, they generally offer you a place to apply for them. This leaves out a lot of people who would have come to New Zealand otherwise, but don't have those contacts. So it's not open to those other than those of the government. We also want to just comment quickly on the investment visa border exceptions. We saw a report this morning, or was it yesterday, but a small number of investors coming into New Zealand under the border exceptions. Now, this is something that we mentioned in passing in an earlier video, but we did that deliberately, that we only mentioned it in passing and didn't really focus on it, and that was sort of for, two major big reasons. On 30th of April, a new border exception was created by adding two new other critical worker exceptions, one for innovative partnerships, which is run by the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, and the other is for the NZ Trade and Enterprise Investment Attraction Program. Now, these would allow for investors to enter New Zealand for fast-track residence, which is, great because investors come to New Zealand, they invest in companies, they create jobs, they create industry, good for the country. Now, we didn't mention this for two reasons. First reason is that very few of you probably are going to come to New Zealand with the millions needed to invest. If you are, give us a call, we'll help you out. But the other reason is, for the same reason the government didn't do a big press release when this change was made to the operational manual. It really was just slid in there and so that no one would notice. And that is because this isn't just open to anybody. This is not open to any investor. It's open to those who the government has chosen for it to be open to. In other words, they want you to come here, you have a connection there, they shoulder tap you and say, hey, come apply for this. For our clients who are not in that category, they perhaps are doing other areas which the government hasn't really talked to them about. They don't get that as an option. So we didn't want to open this up as being something that was open and available to investors out there when really it's only open to those who the government chooses open to. So for that reason, we really didn't cover it, and we're really not going to cover it more than this. We wanted to quickly touch on the skilled migrant allocations. This is for those who have had an invitation to apply, have submitted an application and are in New Zealand. Those of you who are in the pool waiting for the draws to restart, there is no update on that. We're still waiting for the Minister to let us know when that is going to take place or whether there's going to be changes coming to that process. Now, as of the last couple of days, it looks like they are now allocating applications filed in early November 2019. This is showing a rapid increase in speed over the past couple of months, which is fantastic to see. It's also great to see that we're getting some rapidly sent applications through to quality control. Now, quality control is what we used to refer to as 2PC or second person check. Every application that Immigration New Zealand processes goes through to a senior officer just to check through it, make sure it's done correctly. And typically would see, a long time before it goes through to that. We're now seeing some going through within 24 hours of allocation to an officer. This means that an officer is seeing the application and within a day approving the residence in principle and sending it off for quality control. This is something we've never seen before. I've never seen anything this fast before, and it is great to see that sort of speed. Of course, this doesn't apply to everyone. For many others, it is still a slow process, and it may take weeks after allocation before you even hear from the immigration officer. If that is you, please don't panic. This is quite normal. While it would be great to see, to get that instant approval in principle for so many more applications, most will still need to go through the longer process. And it seems to be largely down to the job type, where those in a more technical role with a well-matched qualification are being processed quickly, where others or more general roles require a bit more time to go through. We're also seeing more interviews, which for some can be problematic if the interview is not done well, and we're handling that for a few of our clients where the interview has been done in a way which has been generally held against them because they were led in the wrong direction by the interviewer. But generally, don't panic if you don't hear from immigration an officer in for a couple of weeks after it's allocated. It can take time before they'll get to looking at your file. They will have a number of applications on their desk at any one time, and they are overloaded and they are working very hard on a lot of files at once. Or they may be looking for another document to come through. It could be a New Zealand police certificate that they're waiting to arrive, and they're waiting for that before they can go any further. So yeah, don't panic and give them some time to come back to you once it's allocated. Only a few will get this extremely fast service. Most will still have to go through the longer traditional process. Finally, we want to just mention the New Zealand Residence Program. Now, July 2021 is the month we're supposed to get the new NZRP numbers. Now, these are the number of residence visas that Immigration New Zealand can grant in the following 18 months. And it also says how many of those visas, a percentage, can be granted to, say, skilled migrants as opposed to other visa types. Now, 3 years ago, under a coalition government with at least one anti-immigration party involved, these numbers dropped dramatically, leading to the current massive backlog in skilled migrant application processing. 18 months ago, the government failed to give a new NZRP number. Immigration New Zealand, without any real guidance from the government, just to use the previous number, which was this reduced number, and we can't really hold it against them. They have to go with what they've been told, and if the government don't give them a new number, they'll run with what they had previously. Now, this month we should expect a new number to come through. However, we're still waiting for announcements from March, so we aren't overly confident that we will get it. We do hope that we will, but it may be delayed. We're also looking, of course, at the immigration reset that the government has announced, and that could be a factor for them to say we're going to delay it further as well. So we hope it comes through this month, but we really don't know. We do hope that's going to reverse the dramatic reduction we saw 3 years ago, but we have to wait and see. But that is it for today. We will come back to you with more as it comes through. We may not see actual changes to the operational manual for the teacher's exception for a little while. They're still working out the fine details. We will expect to see a lot of changes in the next few weeks around the move to a $27 per hour median wage rate. So we'll come back with those. When they do come through, remember to get those applications made if you fall below that. Until then, kia kaha and stay safe.